All right, good morning. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Stephen, for putting this together. My name's Dan Rickman. I'm with the U.S. Small Business Administration, part of the Syracuse District Office of the SBA. For those of you that aren't aware, I think everybody probably is, but I'm just going to go through it anyway because it's part of the spiel, right? The SBA, we're the federal agency that's responsible for helping small businesses. Our mission statement is helping small businesses start, grow, and succeed. We do that in a variety of ways. You can see here we provide programs for financing, business counseling and training, government contracting, that's a big deal. Pretty much whatever it takes to help small businesses start, okay? We're established in 1953. The Syracuse District Office covers 34 counties in upstate New York. It's actually easier to describe what we don't cover. We don't cover this little stretch over here, right there along Lake Erie, and we don't cover the city. So we cover about 2/3 of the state by geography. And there's 8 of us in the office, so we have quite a large territory. My role, one of my roles in the office, I'm an economic development specialist. I don't know what that means either, but I'm also the District International Trade Officer, and that was a little bit more clear to me. I serve as the point of contact within the Syracuse District for all export inquiries. You know, one of my jobs is connecting folks. A lot of times they come to our office because they need help with business plan, and maybe they're interested in exports. One of my roles is doing workshops like these, identifying specific needs for small businesses, connecting them to some of the resources you're going to hear from today, and you've already heard from today, to make sure that they get the help that they need. Okay. Every state has at least one district office. Every district office has somebody like me that's a District International Trade Officer. And we also have SBA trade finance experts that are co-located with Department of Commerce and many of the USIACs. So these are folks at SBA that deal just with some of the finance programs that I'm going to talk about today. That's what I'm going to talk about for the most part is how we can help increase access to capital with respect to exports. So, you already saw a little bit of a variation on this slide. Everybody's numbers are always a little bit different, but we use different sources. We already saw that small business. Well, I don't think you have that statistic. Small businesses actually account for 30% of all U.S. exports. In New York State, it's even higher. It's over half of New York State exports result from small businesses. And if you look at some of the other interesting statistics, that's by volume, dollar volume. If you look at actual numbers of exporters, all exporters, 70% of them have fewer than 20 employees. So small businesses do export. They export successfully. Okay, so that's something that we try and emphasize, that it is possible. There are some red tape things you have to jump through, and we have resources to help. But as long as you have a good plan, you can be very successful in exporting. Another neat little stat. Since 2005, SBA has guaranteed over 15,000 international trade-related loans worth over $5 billion. So it's an example of a little part of what we do to increase exports. So briefly, I'm going to go to a little bit more detail on what's a small business, because that's one of the key eligibility things that you may have heard. Department of Commerce uses our definitions when it comes to getting the discount on some of their services. In general, if you're a manufacturer, it is fewer than 500 employees. You're considered a small business from the federal government's perspective. Can go as high as 1,500 employees, depending on the industry you're in. It's based on NAICS codes. You can visit sba.gov, size standards, to kind of find out where you fit. Wholesalers, it's fewer than 100 employees. Service company is a little bit different. It's based on revenue. The vast majority, it's the $7 million in annual revenue. You're considered a small business, but for some industries, you can go higher, up to 35.5, and still be considered a small business. Alternatively, There is an alternative size standard as well. A firm with less than an average of $5 million in net income for the past 2 years and a net worth of less than $15 million can be considered a small business as well. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind if you're trying to figure out. If you're on the upper end, I have 501 employees. Does that mean I'm a big business? Well, maybe not if you meet the alternative size standard. There's a lot more rules to that, just in general. So, export loans. So I'll talk a little bit about what is an SBA export loan? Well, it's not actually a loan. You can't come to my office and say, hey, Dan, I want a loan. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. What we do is we guarantee loans to banks. So we kind of serve as a bit of an insurance policy for lenders. Because fundamental risk associated with exporting is when you're dealing with foreign entities, there's banks don't like foreign accounts receivables. Let me just preface it with that. I think Ralph can kind of speak to that in general, and he will, in fact. So what we do is we make it a little bit more appealing, maybe, for the bank by guaranteeing up to 90% of the loan for export. So if a borrower was to default on that loan, we would make the bank whole up to 90% of the loan amount. So it's a pretty good deal. Well, for the bank, certainly, but also for the borrower, because a lot of times this is financing that they couldn't otherwise obtain because of maybe the risk with respect to, maybe it's their first export transaction. I don't know. That's kind of how it works. These are the three primary loan programs that we have. I'll go into them in a little bit more detail, but in general, our international trade loan is good for up to $5 million for pretty much your typical business needs, what you would normally use a small business loan for: working capital, real estate, equipment. With respect to trade, exports, funding can be used to expand into new markets, expand your facilities. Maybe you're suffering competition and you need to upgrade your facilities to compete more cost effectively with foreign manufacturers, for example. That's perfectly reasonable use of proceeds for an international trade loan with SBA. Export Express is another loan we have. It's a little bit, we say express because it's a little bit quicker turnaround. It's a little bit easier for the banks, expedited underwriting. A result of that is that the amounts are a little bit lower. You can only borrow up to $500,000 for an Export Express loan. And again, it can be used for financing inventory, accounts receivable, export development activities. It's just a bit of a quicker process. We also have our Export Working Capital Program, which is up to $5 million for short-term working capital needs. So you're looking at a 12-month horizon. Say you want to finance a specific transaction, you can use the Export Working Capital Program. So, again, a little bit more detail. I'm not going to read everything on here because you're going to get these slides. And there's a lot more detail on our website, of course. But the key things to remember is you can use it for any of these purposes, okay? You can retool, become more competitive. You can use it for working capital. A business plan is required for this and any other SBA guaranteed loan, particularly for export. What does that mean what do we require really? Do we need a 142-page business plan? Probably not. Does the bank want to see some kind of idea? Do they want to have an idea of how these funds are going to help you grow your business and thus repay the loan? Absolutely. Thus, we make it a requirement. And we do have a lot of initiatives to help folks with the business planning process and business counseling. I mentioned it's one of the things that we do through a couple of entities. We finance the Small Business Development Center of New York State. And across the U.S., they can help with small business plans. They have folks that have particular expertise that are designated to help with export plans. And again, we partner with our folks at the Department of Commerce and the state to help people flesh out, do the market research, prove they've got a case for the loan so that they can get, and then in turn, have a good case for financing. Okay?
Excuse me.
Yes?
Some of the things you do they overlap with Exim?
A little bit, particularly with the Export Working Capital Program. They have a similar program. Exim doesn't have the small business limitation that we do. You have to be a small business to be eligible for our thing. So when you're talking about documenting eligibility, that's one of the things we look at. The flip side is Exim has a requirement that the content of the product that's being exported must have 50% U.S. content. So that is a limitation that Exim has that we don't. We don't have a U.S. content limitation. They don't have a limit, a $5 million limit. We do. So sometimes it works a little bit better. It depends. I guess it depends really, and really it kind of comes down to your banker. Okay, whether or not they are participating with SBA and Exim or both. And your banker is going to help you figure out which program might be the best fit for you. Based on the underwriting requirements, turnaround time, there's a lot of variables that go into it. So yes, there is some overlap. And they've come out with some products recently. I think Ralph's going to talk about a little bit more about some of the Exim loans, right, Ralph?
Yes.
Yes.
And is it possible to access support from both?
Absolutely. Yeah. Getting an SBA loan does not preclude you from getting an Exim loan, and vice versa. Okay. You could certainly access both. There's not a maximum, loan guarantee that you can get from the federal government. It's you can get as many loans as you can get. Actually, does that answer your question, or is that your question?
The other question I have is, if you access loan guarantee from SBA or Exim, but you want to use MEGA for insurance purposes, is that possible?
Use what for insurance?
MEGA, multilateral investment guarantee, which is a subsidiary of.
Oh, okay. Again, one does not preclude you from the other than one lender taking a look at your existing. If you can get more loans, then great. I would say it's not likely that you'd be able to get an SBA loan and then get an Exim loan and then get another. At some point, the reason that a business would be, I guess, eligible for a guaranteed loan is they aren't able to access credit otherwise. So it's one of the things. If you can get that many loans, you probably don't need a guaranteed loan, right, Ralph? So that means you're otherwise credit worthy, and it wouldn't be necessary to get that. But no, it doesn't preclude you, from getting an SBA loan this month and then paying it off, and then getting an Exim loan and then paying it off, and then getting another. There's no rules or restrictions in that respect. In Export Express, just a little bit more about the $500,000 is the limit. A little bit more flexible than the international trade loan in terms of the simplified underwriting. You can use, again, to enter, expand in export markets, finance, and export development activity. So some of the things that Catherine mentioned, translating marketing collateral, going to a trade show, you do have to pay for those things up front typically, even if you're getting reimbursed from one of the various programs that are out there in terms of reimbursement grants. This might be a way for you to, if you don't have the money up front, you can use the proceeds of one of these loans for that purpose, and then get reimbursed, pay off the loan. Pretty good deal. Translating your brochures and catalogs, Catherine mentioned. This is one way to pay for that if you don't have the money. And finally, we have the Export Working Capital Program. This one's a little bit different than the other two programs. I mentioned for the other two programs, you don't come to me, okay? You have to go to the bank. The bank's the one that does the loan, okay? if you visit our website, sba.gov/ny/Syracuse, you can get a list of participating lenders within our region that are participating with SBA. You can see which ones are export lenders and participate in Export Express. Okay. Should I do that one more time? sba.gov/ny/Syracuse. The Export Working Capital Program, EWCP, is a little bit different, though. It's the only loan program where, while you still must go to your bank, and you can find a list of the EWCP lenders here, that is the one program that SBA folks are still involved in. My colleague in New York City, at the USIAC in New York City, Tony Corsini, is the SBA's International Trade Finance Specialist for our entire territory. If you go into Tim's territory, colleague in Cleveland covers his region. With this program, the banker and the borrower and the SBA Trade Finance Specialist work together to put together a loan package, come up with, do all the paperwork. So you do work hand in hand, and this one particular program with one of my colleagues. So at least in this respect, while I can't tell you which lender to go to, I can send you to Tony Corsini, and she can tell you which banks participate with the EWCP program. Because it is the one program, like I said, that is necessary to do this. Again, it's for 12 months of, typically it's for up to 12 months. One of the requirements is that you must have 12 months of operating history or proven expertise in the industry that you're doing business in. Okay. The most common use is for transaction-based financing. It's a single order, maybe it's a revolving line for a series of orders within a predetermined period of time. Purchase order financing, in other words. Okay. It can also be an asset-based line of credit. Working capital for pre-shipment, post-shipment, increases. The borrowing base is based on the inventory. Okay. It's a more complex program for larger transactions, clearly, because the Export Express program often will work for smaller amounts, but it's something to keep in mind. Use of proceeds for the asset-based EWCP. A lot of detail here. You can see where you can use it for to finance a letter of credit, for example, I think, which Ralph's going to get into a little bit more detail. Finance existing export foreign inventory. Lots of great uses for it. To support standby letters of credit, uses performance or bid bonds. Transaction base, again, pretty straightforward here. One of the neat things about all of the programs I've talked about is you don't actually have to be a direct exporter. You could be a manufacturer that is perhaps selling to a wholesaler that in turn is exporting your product. For all the programs I've talked about, I think for your purposes too, you're considered an exporter. So don't think that just because you're making widgets in your garage and selling it on eBay into Canada, or selling it to somebody who in turn is selling it on eBay into Canada, that you're not an exporter, because you are. Okay. You do have to document the fact that you are somebody is in turn selling that product of yours overseas, but it's another way to, I guess, realize that you're an exporter. Okay. So don't overlook indirect exporting. The last program I want to briefly touch on is our Capline Working Capital Line of Credit. This program is a little bit different in that it can be used for both domestic activities as well as export-related activities. Okay, so for the export loans that I've talked about, 90% guarantee, you have to use it for export. Okay, with this one, you can use it for both, and the guarantee is still fairly significant, up to 85% on lines of credit up to $150,000, and 75% on the higher amounts up to $5 million. Okay. it doesn't replace these programs. It's just another option. And if the lender is participating in this program, it could be another excellent option for you to discuss with your lender. So I want to talk about express trade credit insurance because Ralph's going to talk a little bit about this. Is one of the risk mitigation techniques. It's a product that comes from Excellent, and it's a great way to secure your foreign accounts receivable, and we require it on a lot of our loans. Okay, so it's one way to offset the risk of the financing overseas. Okay. Finally, here's my contact info as well as Tony Corsini. Like I mentioned, Tony Corsini, she manages the Export Working Capital Program, and she's the go-to person. She's the one I go to if I have questions about any of the export loans. Okay. You can reach me at any time via email. I'm happy to answer questions. Tony's pretty good also. Pick up the phone. She usually picks up the phone when you call her, actually, which is kind of neat. You try and call me, I'm probably not in the office, so send me an email. Other than that, thank you for coming. If you have any questions, I'll be around afterwards.